Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Died with Pete and Alex. It's your weekly update on some of the famous, infamous, and otherwise noteworthy people who died in the past week.
They're no longer with us.
Yes. So, Pete, I understand you have our first honoree of the week, Mr. Willie Marshall.
Yes, Willie Marshall is not a household name, I wouldn't say. Born December 1st, 1930, died June 2nd, 2023, at the age of 92.
92.
He is a hockey player who scored 1 goal in the National Hockey League, playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's not why he's famous.
That's a league record, isn't it?
It is. It is not. Well, he does hold league records, but in the American Hockey League, which is the minor leagues of the NHL. So the one step below the NHL, you have the AHL. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like AAA baseball, if to use a more American familiarism. And in the AHL, he was at the time, I don't think he still is, but he was the American Hockey League's all-time leader in games played, goals scored, assists, points, and hat tricks. He had 523 goals, 25 hat tricks, 852 assists, and made a huge career out of just being an American Hockey League player. He got called up a couple times, 33 total NHL games for the Leafs. But just never stuck at the major league level, and yet dominated at the American Hockey League level. And that's why I wanted to honor him, because it's such an interesting category. I feel like, again, to go back to baseball, not to make this all American, but to go back to baseball, there's a kind of category, a nickname for a player like that called a quadruple A player, because AAA ball is the highest minor league level, and then they can dominate in minor leagues and just never click in the major leagues. And so they're almost too good for the minors, but not good enough for the majors somehow. They fall into a gap. They fall through the cracks.
That's really fascinating.
And so I think that's where Willie Marshall falls in. He's 3 times American Hockey League All-Star, won the Calder Cup, which is like the championship of the American Hockey League 3 times. Was named to the American Hockey League Hall of Fame in 2006. They even named an award after him, the Willie Marshall Award, which is awarded. They give that to the leading goal scorer in the American Hockey League every year. That's named after him, and it's like somebody who's so dominated at one level, but like the goal. I think if you asked most hockey players, I could be wrong, but I feel like if you asked most players, if you could choose between dominating the American Hockey League or barely kind of getting by in being basically a forgotten journeyman in the National Hockey League, they might choose the latter. They might be like, well, that's the whole goal of the minor leagues is to get to the major leagues. And yet there's an interesting, I love minor league baseball. I love minor league hockey. I love, I like that it's an interesting kind of, you usually see a balance between players who are on the rise, kids who are on the rise, and like older players who are kind of like past their prime and are kind of riding it out. But then there's some people who just kind of stick at that level. They are, in the prime age for the athlete in their league, but they've topped out here at the minors, and it's always interesting to see those guys. Or ladies.
Do you know how he felt about that? Was he frustrated? Was he like, well, this is better than working at a gas station? Or, did he come to terms with the fact that he was a great big fish in a small pond?
I think the disparity wasn't as great as it was. This is in like the 50s, basically. And so even, nowadays being a professional athlete is a whole different ballgame. Right, the amount of money, the amount of fame has snowballed. But being that he was born in Canada, I have to feel like just making his living playing hockey was probably a pretty good, it's not to generalize, but it's the boyhood dream of a lot of Canadians. Mm-hmm. And so I have to think that he was probably pretty okay with what he accomplished. I mean, definitely okay with what he accomplished. He was definitely, you know, very few people can be that lucky, but I do have to wonder if it stuck in his craw at all.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, you hear
tough
about
to
people
tell.
who are like, oh, they played their whole career and they never won a championship or never
Right.
achieved this level. But he's kind of like a level below that, where he barely got into the being able to qualify for the, you know, cup or whatever the thing
Scored
is.
one goal in the National Hockey League. That's more than, you know, more than most people who aspire to that ever get to do.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of parallels in other fields. I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Maybe like a one-hit wonder, but not even like it's not even a hit. I don't know.
I guess it's like if you were, I don't know, good at writing songs for other people, but you personally never had hits. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting, like maybe like a really successful bar band or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know, but hats off. You know, I'm trying to think of a hockey related way to give a salute to Mr. Willie Marshall, 92 years old. Apparently spent the later part of his life writing Christian poetry in Pennsylvania. So,
And he was moderately successful. Not he never made it to the top, but he was a solid
Right.
middle person.
You know, it could be
Hockey
like,
to poetry. That's a strange transition I would not have expected.
come on. Hockey is a graceful game. Maybe it's kind of like Michael Collins, the astronaut Michael Collins, who went to the moon but had to stay in the car. He was the designated driver of the lunar mission.
He orbited the moon, but never
Yeah.
set foot on the moon.
Yeah. Maybe kind of like that.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. He's still been to space and still did more than most people will ever do.
Yeah.
But
He was an astronaut.
he's not.
And he
yeah.
went to the moon.
He went near the moon.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Well,
Willie Marshall.
Willie Marshall. I keep wanting to say Willie Mitchell, and that's not at all what I want to do here.
When you first said Willie Marshall, I thought you were referring to Will Marshall from the Land of the Lost. I thought maybe
Yes, he is.
they pulled off. They'd done another Rick Dalton thing where the Sid and Marty Krofft announced that Will had just died.
Will had just died, but in the land of the lost. So
Yeah.
who knows? Time is all wibbly wobbly there. But yes, hats off to Willie Marshall. Alex, who is your first honoree this week?
Well, I mentioned songwriting a minute ago, trying to come up with a good analogy, and so it might be.
I stepped on your transition there.
No, that's fine. It might be because I was preparing to talk about Cynthia Weil, a name I did not recognize upon hearing it. Born 18th of October, 1940 through June 1st, 2023. And she is, in fact, a songwriter, a very accomplished songwriter, mostly with her husband, Barry Mann. They were brill building songwriters, and that was sort of basically a factory system where songwriters would write songs that would be mostly farmed out to other people to perform. A lot of hits of the 60s and 70s kind of fell into that particular genre. The Beatles kind of ruined things by suddenly now bands were supposed to write their own songs.
Yeah.
And kind of started the decline of the professional songwriter. But I know what you're thinking. What has she done? How would I know her? And
Sure.
Pete, you're roughly the same age as I am, and I'm sure many of these songs are going to be familiar to you. She wrote on Broadway, Here You Come Again, the Dolly Parton hit. She did the theme from Christmas Vacation. He's So Shy by the Pointer Sisters. Love Is Only Sleeping by the Monkees. Somewhere Out There by from the American Tail movie. And literally hundreds of other songs. She's probably her most famous song though is probably You've Lost That Loving Feeling, which was a huge hit for Hall & Oates and originally by the Righteous Brothers. In 2010, You've Lost That Loving Feeling was officially the most played song ever on the radio. The song had been played 14 million times by 2010. And
that's odd that they can track that, and odd that it beat other. I feel like there are lots of other things that I would pick first. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
Oldies.
as of 2010, but also, I mean, back then radio was different. They did keep track of what played. And stuff. Billboard and stuff was like influenced by what was,
Totally.
what was played. But in fact, between her and her husband together earned a total of 112 BMI awards, which is when you have a song that charts.
Your body mass.
Yes, and they won
weigh you,
115 millionaire awards, which means that they had 115 songs that were played over 1 million times.
Wow.
So, in addition to the ones I mentioned, all top artists of the 20th century. You got Cher, Lou Rawls, Dusty Springfield, Quincy Jones, The Muppets, Lionel Richie, Hanson, Josh Groban. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. So I was looking on the list of all the songs that they did, and there was a nice little trilogy there in the middle. They're all in alphabetical order. It's Getting Better, It's Gonna Be Fine, and It's Not Easy. I thought that was kind of funny that they had those three in a row.
Right.
And following,
you're saying we should do an alphabetical podcast, a podcast going through all of her songs alphabetically.
That would be a lot. That could be fun though. There's a lot of them have multiple versions of, some of the songs were covered, 10, 15 times and stuff. So
Sure.
they'd have a lot of things to choose from. And the winner of the Rupert Holmes Award this week, she had a second career. In 2015, she published a mystery called I'm Glad I Did. I always like when people write books, or it's kind of like Willie Marshall with his poetry, kind of a second surprising side career. I guess it would have been more surprising if she went to hockey as a second career. That would have been
Sure.
That would have been a different thing. But yeah, that's the story of Cynthia Weil. I want to thank Clon Drive Homer on Twitter for bringing this to our attention. And if there's someone you see passing and you want to call it to our attention, we are on Twitter at Who Died Pete Alex. So far we've gotten a few recommendations from readers, listeners.
Listeners.
Yeah.
Viewers or
read the
listeners?
tweets, but they listen to the show. So
Viewers like you.
yes, exactly. Yes, viewers. We are also on the YouTube.
Yeah, somebody early on, one of the ones that we posted, somebody was like, no love for, and I forgot who it was, but it was somebody I'd never heard of, but was, I think, a big star in another country. And it's interesting how skewed, based on your pop culture, where you're from, how certain people are bigger or smaller than others.
Yes, this is true. We do definitely have a American slant to our thing. We try to get people from other nations if they're, I guess, mostly if they've had some impact on U.S. culture. But anyway,
well, speaking of America, I want to say USA.
What?
Because our next honoree just last minute just made it under the wire. We were recording this episode later than usual this week, and we just happened to get one in because June 7th, 2023, we mark the passing of Hussein Khosrow Ali Vaziri, better known to people worldwide as the Iron Sheik. Born March 15th, 1942, although he celebrated, past tense, his birthday on September 9th. And so the official documentation says March 15th, but according to him, his birthday was September 9th. I don't know why that was. I just read that now. But yeah, he was born in Iran. A lot of professional. Of course, he was a professional wrestler. One of the famous ones, notable for being kind of in the WWE, well, then WWF, now WWE. Their rise to global domination with the Rock and Wrestling connection into the WrestleMania era. He was a lot of wrestlers who portray different ethnicities are not always that ethnicity. They're I would say it's kind of more rare to find somebody who is actually of the heritage that they're portraying.
Yeah.
Than it is to find somebody genuinely representing their own heritage. And yet the Iron Sheik was born in Iran, grew up there in a kind of say poor to working class family, moved to the U.S. At some point to kind of try to make it here, and was actually a Greco-Roman wrestler, an Olympic star. Did not go to the Olympics himself, but was an assistant coach for Team USA in the 1972 Munich Olympics. And then, like a lot of people in that, they just kind of either became interested or needed the money and found their way into pro wrestling. Did some training, worked for a while as the Great Hussein or the Great Hussein Arab, and taking a few pages out of the book of the Sheik, who was or now kind of the acoustic guitar of wrestling, that he was now known as the original Sheik. In that there was a Syrian wrestler, I think he was Syrian or Lebanese wrestler, known as the Sheik, who did a lot of similar kind of anti-American stuff. But then the Great Hussein then kind of decided to be the Iron Sheik around the time that U.S. and Iran tensions started to really kind of boil over in the late 70s into the early 80s, kind of really rode that for all it was worth. With his time with the WWF, then he was the intermediary kind of between, you had the champion Bob Backlund, who was kind of a all-American, not pretty boy, but a goody two-shoes kind of all-American guy. And yet you had this up-and-coming, Vince McMahon really wanted to push Hulk Hogan and make, Hulk Hogan was not yet a star, such as it was. He was up and coming, and they wanted to kind of transfer that. And in order to do that, you can't just have the goody two shoes get beaten by the up and coming golden boy, because then if the audience likes both of those guys, they're going to be conflicted, and so you need an intermediary. And so the Bob Backlund was wrestling the Iron Sheik, and Bob Backlund's manager threw in the towel, very controversial. So he didn't submit, he didn't get pinned. His manager literally threw in the towel because he was worried about Bob Backlund's health or something like that. And so the Iron Sheik won the championship, held it briefly until he lost it to Hulk Hogan, kicking off WrestleMania proper. Hulkamania proper, and eventually WrestleMania, which led to WrestleMania. One leads to the other.
Yeah.
Had a little bit of a feud with him, a feud with Sergeant Slaughter, did a lot of, anti-American. And hey, if you're doing anti-American stuff, what's the next step? You team up with, of course, Nikolai Volkov, the Soviet wrestler, who was not, in fact, Russian. He was Croatian, I believe. But between the two of them, they did some fantastic heel work in anti-American stuff. They really knew how to rile up the crowd and create this kind of jingoistic USA. I still say, I'm going to say this as many times as possible until hopefully one day it happens. That it's my dream to have a crowd angrily chanting USA at me. And part of that is in tribute to the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, who were favorites of mine.
Oh, sure, we can arrange that.
Yeah, well. Also, we both... I know you just finished, and I'm in the midst of reading the book about Vince McMahon, Ringmaster, and they kind of talk about this a little bit there. But one of the moments that I remember being kind of, as a kid, you're watching this and you start to doubt you start to question whether or not this can be real. And there was pre-internet, and I guess it was just in newspapers, which is how people knew. But like the word of mouth that got around that. Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who was a very pro-USA guy, carried around a 2x4 and yelled and waved a flag. Not
even really a hacksaw in real life.
No, he was portraying a hacksaw, but he and Iron Sheik were arrested. They were pulled over and arrested on the Garden State Parkway in between matches. They were traveling together. They Hacksaw Jim Duggan grew up in a state where you can have an open container of beer in your car as long as you're not drunk, and New Jersey is not one of those states. And so he was, drinking. They saw him drinking, pulled him over, searched the car, and found some marijuana and some cocaine. And that arrest made headlines, and kind of, since they were feuding with each other at the time, that made hardcore wrestling, kind of the diehards in the business, including Vince McMahon, and made them irate, and they both got fired for that, I think.
It's more they got fired for being in the car together, more so than being arrested for the drugs.
Exactly. So, yeah. If they were arrested, separately, they would have just kind of, I'm sure they would have gone out of their way to brush that under the rug and be like, it's okay, we can smooth this over. I know cops,
Well, plus since they were bad guys, that you could totally use that. Like, oh, they got arrested for, So
that's how bad he is. And so fired, and then they, both kind of came back eventually. Iron Sheik, so imagine this. Imagine you are, generally, you are portraying a character of your heritage. You are representing your homeland, and you're doing it in a way that kind of stokes kind of sentiment against your homeland, perhaps. But you are doing your best to kind of represent, authentically represent maybe your homeland. And then they're like, hey, guess what? We're not really at war with Iran anymore, but now it's the 90s. Gulf War is happening. We need an Iraqi. You want to come back as an Iraqi? And to be an Iranian and say hey, you want to come back as Iraqi? We don't, we're dumb Americans who are just yeah, whatever. They're all the same. Yeah. And we are not, but I'm saying, the perception is, and it's not, I'm saying it's not a baseless accusation that a lot of Americans had no real, distinction in their mind between Iran and Iraq.
And like you said, back then, most people were not the ethnicity or background they were portraying. They have, it was much looser than it was today. Yeah.
Yeah, so he came back as Colonel Mustafa, the Iraqi.
He did it. He did come
soldier.
back.
Yeah, he came back as Colonel Mustafa when Sergeant Slaughter turned evil. Sergeant Slaughter was pro-Iraqi during the Gulf War, and he needed some people to go with him, and they brought back but it's a whole different story. But on Sergeant Slaughter's side, his former enemy Colonel Mustafa, I don't think they ever said yes, this is the Iron Sheik who is now Colonel Mustafa. They were just kind of you don't know who this is. This is a new guy, Colonel Mustafa, who looks exactly like the Iron Sheik.
He had the mustache and everything. They didn't give him a different, dress him up
a different outfit, but he spoke the same, and I think the mustache was the same. No, the Saddam Hussein mustache was already taken by another guy who was in. It's a long story that let's not talk about. I will say that he had a later, career. People kind of appreciated his honesty in things. He did a little bit of acting in a kind of. Going back to what we were talking about with Willie Marshall, the kind of notoriety of being almost this sentence kind of falls into the AHL of celebrity notes in that Iron Sheik appeared alongside Daniel Baldwin and Corey Feldman in a movie in 2011 called Operation Belvis Bash, which I'm not sure the movie wasn't even linked to on Wikipedia. The names were, but the title was not. So I don't know. But probably most people nowadays, young people, know Iron Sheik as a Twitter celebrity because he, in the last 10 plus years, he's kind of become known for his Twitter account, which has featured, according to the Wikipedia entry, featured violent profanity-ridden tweets denouncing various celebrities, making him a comedy star on social media, and he had a particularly always had a bad word to say about Hulk Hogan, which was fun and refreshing, and would often just pop up kind of ranting against things just by saying F this or F that. And
maybe I shouldn't ask this, and that was really him? That wasn't a WWE flack writing all this stuff?
It was his managers did most of the managing of the account. His he had two people who kind of managed his career and his account. They did a lot of the tweets for him. Yeah,
but he approved them. So
yeah, I think they probably mirrored his actual sentiment, but I think they were a little bit more crafted than he was letting on, which fits with his wrestling career.
Yeah.
But Iron Sheik, you got to move like the Sheik. One of my all-time favorites. Always appreciated him.
Camel clutch.
The camel. A friend of mine who was always super into wrestling and was Egyptian and kind of had a special attachment to the Iron Sheik. Saw him at a wrestling convention once, and he was doing at a show he would You pay like $20 and you get a Polaroid of him putting you in the camel clutch.
Wow.
And my friend absolutely jumped at the chance. Got a Polaroid of him in the camel clutch, and you can see on my friend's face that the Iron Sheik was not really holding back. He was really doing it. It's not just like, all right, now put your hands here. He puts you in it, and like my friend said, his back hurt for days after that.
The liability alone, there's no way they could do that nowadays.
Yeah. So it's
totally Belzer, that guy.
Yeah. So Iron Sheik. I'm again trying to think of an appropriate sign. I should start in my notes writing clever little tip of the hat kind of ways to write that we salute them.
Yes.
But a tip of the pointy shoe. Yeah.
Yes.
Is that disrespectful? I'm not sure. The shoe, I don't know. But Iron Sheik.
Yeah.
Sad to see him go.
Goodbye, funny man. Yes, I remember him from one of the. He was like the first real golden age of the WWE. That first early rounds.
Sure, yeah.
So. Well, my next honoree is Jessie Maple, who died at the age of 86. She's a filmmaker, and also, perhaps more importantly, she was a sort of civil rights activist, pioneer. I don't know how you'd call it that. She started off as a scientist. She ran a bacteriology lab in Philadelphia, and I always have mixed feelings when people leave like hard science to go do the arts. You know what I mean? It seems like, oh, you stood all that studying and all that knowledge, and now you're just going to throw it away on make-believe stories. But no, she continued to do serious work after she attended the National Education Training School, which was a sort of program from WNET, which would educate with the intention of training African American people to get behind the scenes work in movies and television. Like they said, oh, they're underrepresented in those fields. We need to do more. And so she learned her filmmaking craft there, and she was the assistant editor on Shaft's Big Score and The Super Cops. And she wound up joining the Cinematographers Union, and then she joined the Cameraman's Union. And she was the first African-American woman to join the Cameraman's Union, but she was blackballed. The union said, no one hire her. And she sued ABC, NBC, CBS, and won. And
all the networks.
Yeah. So, and she later wrote a book called "How to Become a Union Camera Woman," chronicling her fight to become part of the union. She worked as a news camera operator for a while, and I thought this was interesting. She said she made a point of, she noticed that when news stories were edited together, frequently voices of African Americans and other minorities were edited out. Because and so she said she made a point when she was doing camera work to film things where it would be harder for them to edit the race element out. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
Trying to imagine how that was done, but it's an interesting thing that she was cognizant of it and tried to work around that. She later made
almost like Doug Benson's thing about being an extra and making sure that you were in the way. So making sure that you're represented by making it that hard. Well, you can't really get rid of it because Harrison Ford's in that shot. So same idea, but for cultural importance. I like it.
She made 2 feature films. The first African American woman to direct 2 films. Imagine that. And then she went on to open her own theater in her Harlem brownstone to show her films and showcase other African American filmmakers. So she continued to, work for pushing in that area. It's I don't know, inspiring, but it's humbling. I don't know but the fact that we all know great civil rights pioneers and who we learn about in school, but it's also just a reminder that there's these fights are going on 1,000 different fronts. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So it's it's, to be aware that is going on is, I think, an important thing. So gone but not forgotten. Now, you have our historical one this week, but I understand you also have some shout-outs for other people we did not get to cover in any depth this week.
Yeah, just as I was going through, I feel like maybe we can make this a recurring thing. If there's people that I just wanted to kind of make a nod, tip the hat to, but didn't, maybe couldn't necessarily go that deep into their career. Well, could have, but I don't know that much. Don't know enough about either of them to feel like I could represent their lives accurately, but I didn't want to let them go by without marking the passing of two women, each of whom were 83 years old. Yukiko Takayama, who's a Japanese screenwriter who wrote the screenplay for The Terror of Mechagodzilla. So I think the only woman to have written it. This kind of pales in comparison when you're talking about Jessie Maple and her career, but still notable for being the only woman in the original Godzilla movies, the only woman to have written one of the original Godzilla movies. And it's not one of the better regarded Godzilla films, but still she did also worked in the Japanese film industry for a while, and somebody whose career had at least one was almost, I wouldn't say this is the Willie Marshall award, but Astrud Gilberto passed away this week too. Astrud, also 83, best known for singing "The Girl from Ipanema." And had a string of well-known songs. Well, maybe not well-known songs out of it. Basically, she was best known for that song, for singing that song, and treated horribly by people in the industry and people she was in relationships with who were in the industry. I think Stan Getz was her longtime, was her husband for a while, who just treated her, abused her horribly, and also, according to hearsay, according to rumor, legend, also arranged that she got no money from The Girl from Ipanema recording. So, like, originally it was just like, oh, it's a shame that she made this famous recording, but she only got the kind of, the session rate for it, basically. And then somebody came out and was like, no. The Stan Getz talked to the producer and made sure that she did not get that money even, like that she got $0.
Wow.
And so, she's been, she does have many other recordings, but it is essentially, I would call and almost put this in the one-hit wonder column.
Yeah.
But definitely a name that I knew, and kind of, again, somebody who I'm sure there are people who are much more familiar with her career who will bristle at my generalizations, but did want to mark the passing of Yukiko Takayama and Astrud Gilberto. Before going back into history and marking on this day, let's see, about 11 years ago, June 2nd, on this day, not this day, but this week, June 2nd, 2012. June 2nd, 2012, we mark the passing of Colin Lionel M. Colin Lionel M. Who, M.
James
yes, he was
Bond's.
James Bond's boss. Born November 20th, 1932 in Hampshire, England, so maybe you're right. How British was he? Age 14, ran away to join the British Merchant Navy, briefly pursued a career in boxing, and then following his discharge began pursuing a comedy career where he adopted the stage name Dickie Dawson, which later became Richard Dawson.
More formal.
And that's how we best know him. He became an actor. He was first kind of rose to fame as part of Hogan's Heroes, the TV show, which is bizarre in and of itself, but the fact that he came out of that, had a minor role in the Munster Go Home, so that's long-time listeners to our weekend shows over at Star Wars Minute will know we have a Munster fascination of sorts.
Long term.
And then he put out a 45, a psychedelic kind of 60s swinging record, and then joined the cast of Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In 1970. Stuck with that until the show was canceled in 1973, where game show pioneer Mark Goodson was just like, "Hey, let's get that guy on a panel because he's pretty funny." And he hopped onto the Match Game 73, which is where he kind of first made his
bones.
Made his bones as a game show guy. I don't know. He proved to be a very popular panelist. Everybody loved him on that. They thought he was hilarious, and so that Goodson was developing a new show as not a spin-off. I think somewhere I saw it as written as a spin-off of Match Game, which I guess it kind of uses some of the same DNA as Match Game, because you are trying to match, but it's not. I wouldn't call it a spin-off.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a spin-off. But, doesn't even have a wheel in it.
They started doing developing the Family Feud game show, and apparently Richard Dawson's agent called and was like, "Look, if you don't consider him as host, he's going to be terrible on Match Game, like from now on. Like part of why people like Match Game is because he's great on it. If you don't at least give him an audition, he's going to stink it up out there."
Wow.
So. Luckily, they did give him an audition. He nailed it, and they loved him on it, and so he became the host. Famously, one of his routines, one of his trademarks on the show, which is doesn't look good in a modern lens, and didn't really look that good in a contemporary lens, was he was known as the Kissing Bandit, because he would kind of insist that the female contestants gave him a kiss, and was often somewhat handsy with them, and
not on the cheek. We're talking about on the lips kisses.
Yeah, not just kind of like not a polite TV peck,
not a French on each cheek. It's
no, more of like a French. But TV executives, people working for the network, the people producing the show tried to get him to stop. He did not. He at one point he was just like, all right, fine. Asked viewers to write in and vote on whether or not they liked his habit of kissing the contestants, and overwhelmingly they got about 200,000 responses, and overwhelmingly in favor of him kissing the contestants.
Yeah, the contestants don't have any say in it, but the audience wants it.
People at home. Yeah.
I guess after a certain amount of time, you kind of know. If you're a lady going on a family, like that's going to happen. It's not like you are surprised when you get there and you're like, "Whoa, this guy's trying to kiss me." It's pretty.
Yeah.
So
even though it's a well-known thing, it's still a little bit. It's still very strange, and it looks odd watching it in retrospect. He tried to kind of retcon it in the. I think in the finale he explained he kissed the contestants for love and luck, which his mother did with Dawson himself as a child. He blame it on his parents. I think that's a slapdash kind of patchwork explanation that he's like, well, nobody's gonna give me crap about it if I say it's it's a tribute to my dead mother. But so after the show ended in 1987, he was famously kind of parodying himself in The Running Man, which was a good role featuring, obviously Arnold Schwarzenegger. Speaking of the WWF, Jesse the Body Ventura was in that, wasn't he? Wait a minute, or wasn't he in? I know he was in Predator, but I feel like he was also in Running Man, and now I'm questioning my integrity here. I know. But regardless, he was in, did acting and various appearances. Yes, he was in Running Man briefly. I knew it's been a while since I've seen it. Although when you search Jesse Ventura Running Man, it gives you information about his candidacy for various offices.
Running Man.
Then 1994, they brought Family Feud back with a new host, Ray Combs, and that did well for a little bit, and then ratings started to nosedive. And so they decided to kick out Ray Combs and bring back the original Richard Dawson. So in I think in '94, they brought him back. I think the
94?
the new yeah, I think the new Family Feud came back in '91 or something like that, and then '94 they brought Richard Dawson back. Didn't help. Show got canceled after a couple of years anyway. And then speaking of Ray Combs, what you had a question about Family Feud.
Not a question, but just that it's odd because I feel like Family Feud since then has been more or less on the air continuously. There's been like 4 different hosts and
came back for a third and final, more successful time. I don't know if it's final, but it came back again with Louis Anderson.
They did Louis Anderson. They had Richard Karn, the guy from Home Improvement. They had Jay Peterman from Seinfeld. They had a rotation of hosts.
It's been what's his name for a long time.
Steve Harvey now.
Steve Harvey, yeah,
long time.
But this iteration, the '90s iteration, didn't last too long. Had an initial bit of retro nostalgia, then it failed. And Richard Dawson, in addition to his habit of kissing people, he also had a habit of smoking like crazy, and that's what eventually killed him. His death came 16 years to the day after the death of his Family Feud successor, Ray Combs. Ray Combs also died on this day, but that was in '96. So, yeah.
I think every time that date rolls around, Steve Harvey's like, "Uh-oh, getting ready for the." I have to get past this date again.
It's like a werewolf. They got to lock them up.
All right, so a goodbye funny man. In this case, literally goodbye funny man to Richard
was a
Dawson.
funny man, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, also had some nasty habits, but was, a professional comedian for a bit. So.
And on the scale of things, that's pretty minor compared to a lot of the it's not like Stan Getz where he's ripping people off. Although who knows. But I've discovered that Family Feud is the perfect thing to put on if you're in a room full of people and you don't have anything to talk about anymore. It's the perfect social universal solvent. So
interesting.
Keep that in mind next time you have family over or anything like that where you're like, I'm sick of talking, and so on. Well, I guess that'll wrap up this week's Who Died with Pete and Alex. Don't forget, if you have someone that you want to remind us of or alert us to their passing, you can do it on Twitter at Who Died Pete Alex. We're also on Instagram too. So and some of the people we don't cover here, we do highlight on the Instagram and on the Twitter. So if you want a more comprehensive death tally, go over there and check us out. And then
it's not necessarily spoilers for the show. I was worried about that when we first started. I was like, well, now everybody's going to know who's going to be on the episode. But we post a lot of people on there.
Yeah,
and not all of them make it onto the show, and the people who are on the show don't necessarily make it onto the Instagram, vice versa. So,
right,
it's like a two-pronged attack, if you will.
Yeah, I just wanted our socials to be like your go-to place for when someone famous dies, really. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Anyway, thanks for listening and or watching, everyone, and we'll be back next week to learn who died with Pete and Alex.
Who died?